Ghana initiated policies and various measures costing thousands of millions of dollars to alleviate the impact of the pandemic. And it is only imperative to interrogate the resilience of same to the integrity test. As observed by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently, corruption strives in times of crisis, and ongoing global pandemic is no exception. According to the UN boss, the response to COVID-19 is creating new opportunities to exploit weak oversight and inadequate transparency, whereby some people divert funds away from others in their hours of greatest need. We all witness to the steps taken to prevent the spread of the pandemic globally and in Ghana. Unfortunately, as states, we are taking the necessary steps to control COVID-19. Criminals, including corrupt gangs, were also at work. Corruption was a problem before COVID-19, but the devastating effect of the pandemic is testament that continuous anti-corruption rhetoric without the will to fight corruption is of no use to anyone. Ghana has won mouth-watering commendations for the manner it has handled the pandemic, but you will agree that the pandemic also exposed the inequalities and failings that exist in our country due to endemic corruption. We can point to our fragile public health system, housing deficit, limited access to potable water, among others. For example, awarding of contracts for personal protective equipment, that's PPE, to persons, companies connected to us, overpricing face masks, hand sanitizers, and other key medications. This is the time to reinforce existing systems, to robust anti-corruption procedures, so we recover with integrity. It is fashionable that such times to turn all attentions on the public sector as though it is the only sector that engages in corrupt practices. That is the orientation that has made it difficult for the nation to make significant progress with its anti-corruption effort. Public sector corruption is inexcusable, and we must condemn it outright. But we cannot effectively fight endemic corruption in our society if we do not extend the effort to all sectors of our society. Unfortunately, all sectors have paid lip service to the NACAP, and we turn around and with impotent indignation as corruption appears to be going nowhere. If we had paid honest attention to the implementation of the NACAP, we would have been better prepared for COVID-19 related corruption, and as well as the effort to recover. Recovering with integrity means no one is left out or behind in our collective recovery. Last week, the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice identified 10 safe spaces within the Greater Accra metropolis to offer support to persons suffering or encountering stigmatization from COVID-19. These safe spaces will serve as havens for stigmatized persons to call or walk in to receive counseling and other forms of psychosocial support from trained personnel to facilitate their full recovery and reintegration into society. They include the Hope Congregation of the Presbyterian Church of Ghana, the Upper Room Temple of Assemblies of God, the Charismatic Evangelical Church at Mamobi, the Wataniya Mosque, Kados Central Mosque, and Hajia Zalia Mosque at Nima, all in Ayawasu East constituency. The rest are the Ebenezer Methodist Church and Winner Chapel International in the Lankwantanai constituency, the Scrap Market Square and Women Empowerment Foundation International at Agugloshi and Old Fadama, respectively. This is also part of the effort at inclusiveness and to ensure that no one is left behind.
The health sector in itself is rendered very vulnerable to to corruption under COVID. And one of the things that you may want to talk about is bribery and facilitation payment. And I want to be quite practical with this. We are aware that some people, during the days of the, if you like, mandatory quarantine, some people who had come from outside the country and were camped in certain hotels, they were able to pay the security agencies to get out of the facility. So instead of undergoing the mandatory 14-day isolation or quarantine, some people paid bribe to the security agencies to get out. Connected to that is the issue of payment of facilitation payment. There are some people who were more or less working as agents who would do payment along the line, so that people who were coming in from abroad at that time were not, had paid their way out, and so many of them didn't have to go through the mandatory quarantine, as I talked about.
Already procurement is a very vulnerable sector, that even without a pandemic, we like to procure goods and services using the single source procurement method. And this was an opportunity, whether it was something that was needed urgently or not, it will be pushed under an emergency relief. And so therefore, we need to ensure that there's transparency, accountability in the public sector. We need to ensure that conflict of interest rules are enforced. We need to ensure that there is robust measures to protect whistleblowers and encourage, indeed, whistleblowers to come forward, especially in relation to the health sector. At least we haven't heard this in Ghana yet, but in other countries, guns were, the temperature guns were purposely made to read positive. Wherever it is, whether you read negative or not, it will read positive. And these had gone into countries, especially developing countries. They were fake gels, these things that the hand sanitizers and so on, were fake. So you had a lot of criminal gangs that had benefited and still continue to benefit from this. In 2020, what SRAJ had planned to do with the United Nations Convention, Office on Drugs and Crime, was to undertake a corruption survey in this country. The first one was done in 2000, and we managed to convince that we need, how many years ago? We need to conduct this study to be sure about what we have, how far we have come. Because of a pandemic, this has been shelved. In fact, it was supposed to be done in conjunction with the Ghana Statistical Service. So it was going to be a very serious and one that we're going to do. Discussions had been done. UNODC, the head office people came, we met Statistical Service, and we laid down the plans. And we're supposed to do it after the census, which had been earmarked for March 2020. That has been shifted, and so we are looking at doing it next year. Now, in terms of integrity, we had also intensified that. We extended the training of officers and the public on integrity, preparing them for compliance issues in the ministries, department, and agencies. And one critical achievement or initiative undertaken was to deal with this issue of prosecution and investigations.
As a membership association, you can imagine that anytime there is an intervention, every member wants to take advantage of it. And the reality is that it's not every member that can benefit from every intervention. So definitely some will get it, some wouldn't get it. And therefore, the pressure will be on us to find out what is happening. What we have tried to do over the period is that anytime there's an announcement or there's an indication of intervention, we try to get involved. We think that is another way of bringing down corruption. Because when the private sector is involved and you push the transparency angle, then you can have value for money in a lot of things. And then there will also be clear criteria for selecting people. So you can also tell your members what is happening. You remember we had the stimulus package as one of the key interventions that government introduced. And before it was even announced, it was mentioned to some of us in the association. And then we started developing proposals as to how it should be made, it should be implemented. We sent proposals to the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Trade. Eventually, the modalities for implementation came out. A lot of ideas were taken. Of course, they were tweaked here and there. They also had their own ideas. But at least they got us involved to be able to participate. We also tried to ensure that the system of implementing was efficient and effective enough to reduce corruption. And in the case of the stimulus package, for example, they introduced a portal system which required that for you to participate, you must necessarily register through a portal. So you don't go and see somebody somewhere and put some envelopes, because when you say corruption, it's not only by the public sector, I agree. The private sector also influences it. You work in the private sector and you want to get advantage of whatever it is there. And it's a natural tendency of things. So to reduce it, register through the portal. Nobody sees you, nobody sees what anybody is doing, but the information you provide is what makes you, gives adequate information about you. And then your ability to assess will be based on the information you have provided. Of course, there could be checks and balances here and there to ensure that the information you are providing is adequate and is accurate. In most cases, monitoring and evaluation is even done after the event. So if there is procurement opportunity that has been given, and some members have been able to assess that procurement opportunity, after the supply, we then need to check. And the checking is not only done by AGI, it's done by the institution that received the supplies. The government has its own institutions like STRAG and other institutions that could check. And then on the basis of that, if there is evidence that some members compromised along the line, you can be blacklisted. And indeed, what happens is that our blacklisting is done in different ways. You can cease to be a member of AGI, but that's voluntary, so you may decide to do so. And what happens is that most businesses that are serious, that are coming into the country and they want partners, they fall on us for due diligence, they fall on us for inquiries about companies, and if you happen to have been blacklisted, you can imagine that the impact or the effect may not be today. It will be next year, it will be 2 years after, when the company may have heard about you, they want, a partnership, they check on the association, and then we say, well, this is the information we have about this company. So it is just right that you do the right thing. And then if you have the opportunity, others didn't have it. So make sure that you supply in the right quality, the quantity, and then you don't overprice. When there's fair competition, overpricing doesn't become an issue because your other competitors will compete you out and you'll be out of business the next time.
What laws are we going to put into place for future pandemics? Because pandemics have always been part of human life, and we will face another pandemic. And as we realize in West Africa, we saw what happened with Ebola in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and other parts. So what are the laws, maybe the next parliament coming in, are going to put into place to make sure that those who abuse the system in resources that have been put into place by the state to alleviate these things are severely punished, not because they are affiliated to a particular party or not because they have certain status in society and they can get away with it. We saw that in the United States, most of those companies that were not qualified and they took resources that the federal government had put out to alleviate the impact of COVID are being punished. They are being held responsible. And some of them are made to pay back the resources. Are we doing the same here? It's important that the next parliament make sure that there is clear audit to make sure that we know how these resources were expended, because we know that we went to the IMF and collected 1 billion. How are these resources expended? And those people who really took these monies, did they use it to do what they had to do? If it is not, how do we make sure that we get them to pay back these monies? Now, of course, we all know the challenges in developing countries, especially in Africa, when it has to do with the fact of these watch-out agencies, where whoever is there is appointed by the party or the government in power. So in that aspect, it becomes very difficult for there to be the requisite checks and balances. Also, we can see that where the parliaments can play an important role is that if you look at the fact that I just finished a research for the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, where we look at the fact that if you look at state-owned enterprises, the CEO or managing director is appointed by the government, and the board is also appointed by the government. So where is the oversight role? Definitely, if they are from the same party in power, they are going to make sure that they don't rock the boat. And that is where it's important for the parliaments to come in. And in fact, if we have robust parliaments where people really vote with their conscience and are willing to make sure that the benefit or the importance of the survival of the state is in stake, they would be able to rise up to these occasions.
When people are found corrupt, I heard AGI talking about blacklisting. Yes, blacklisting is very brilliant, but I just want to call your attention to the fact that FIC already also have a blacklisting. They are supposed, I don't know whether they have it. FIC is supposed to have a certain blacklisting list of those who are involved in anti-money laundering fraud. So it's important we connect all these dots together, and when we connect these dots together, you should share it with the private sector. Share it, it should be accessible. So if anybody wants to do business with me and I check that list and I find your name on the blacklisting list, I'll say, no, I don't want to do business with you. So there should be a real cost to corruption. People should start feeling that, no, it is very dire. But if you keep it alone and it's only your members and it's those who will contact you, you are doing them a favor. Thank you very much.
Is it not the work of SRAJ who will supervise the appointed CEOs and the directors? Thank you.
Just to comment on what my colleague said, that the FIC has a blacklisting of some companies or individuals. We don't have any list like that. What we have is high-risk persons or institutions who have actually come under suspicion of conducting some kind of financial activity within the financial sector. So we try to circulate the list to the financial institutions or the reporting entities so that they will conduct further due diligence on them as and when they conduct businesses with them. So this will be very different to share with the private sector, because we wouldn't have any grounds to blacklist them or to say anything to the private sector to look out for, as they are not actually going to be dealing with them on that financial issues. Thank you.
Does SRAJ not supervise appointed CEOs? No, it is not the responsibility of SRAJ. We don't have that mandate to supervise appointed CEOs. Their mandate gives us the power to investigate allegations of abuse of office and power by these appointed CEOs. So we have the administrative justice power, which deals with unfairness in public administration. Okay. So that's different from supervising them. It is Public Services Commission, and then the head of office of the head of civil service, and some fall under the office of the head of local government service. These are the ones who supervise the CEOs. Ghana, the deterrent effect of our fight against corruption is yet to be felt. That people are not afraid to engage in corrupt conduct. Some even engage in it and they boast about it. And the problem is not even only of investigative institutions, all of us. They boast before us, and we admire them and give them hands up, right? And so we embolden them. So as the law enforcement and anti-corruption institutions do their work, it is also the duty of the citizens to also say, hey, if you engage in corrupt conduct, we have entrusted this power unto you to hold our resources dearly. If you squander them, We will not tolerate that. And I'm sure that many people will shy away from corruption if that happens.
So we don't even know what are corrupt practices. And if you have no knowledge about it, it is very difficult to practice it. So internet becomes a tool that we should read. That information should be available for us to know what is right and what is wrong. The next point you made concerning the consequence of corrupt practices, if you are caught, it can be very, very devastating. In certain parts of the world, if you are shortlisted as being involved in anti-corruption, in corruption behavior, you probably will lose your contract, you lose your license, and that probably will be the end of your company. So you need to know what is right and do it. I know in the case of the government, we already have government institutions that are supposed to be auditing various programs. So I'm sure at the appropriate time they will also be audited. But the point is that it is still early days here to know those who were involved in corrupt practices concerning these interventions and its implementation. So we all need to be on the lookout. Let's continue to monitor. And if anybody is caught in the web, we should be able to make a pronouncement of it. And the blacklisting and the rest that I mentioned, they are all measures that helps. It doesn't completely curb it, but it helps to deter people from involving themselves in all manner of things that lead to corrupt practices.
If the government or the party in power appoints the CEO and appoints the board, who's going to supervise who? In corporate governance, it is the board that is supposed to supervise the CEO. But in this case, if they are from the same party or they are appointed by the same government, obviously they'll feel shy or they would, for some reasons, not hold the CEO responsible if he doesn't meet his targets, if monies are missing and stuff like that. So it is not CHRAG that should do that. It is part of corporate governance. Now, if you really want to fight corruption, whether in the private or public sectors, you must make sure that real corporate governance is practiced. Now, if a CEO does not meet their targets or if resources are missing, and you cannot get a public watchdog like the Auditor General to come and really clearly see what is wrong and sweep the stuff under the carpet, obviously other CEOs and other boards will do whatever they want. Now, when you talked about the internet, I think it's not only the internet that should be used as a weapon. In this era where we have social media, WhatsApp and all those kinds of things, we know, even in the rural areas, now there's the proliferation of mobile phones, which is cheaper. So it should be another way that it should be encouraged by civil society and others to be able to report corruption.
Well, from the United Nations, as a member state organization, we stand resolute to support all the efforts that the state put in place. So if you heard Mr. Ayamdo very well, he was supposed to have been in Vienna this year. So anytime he goes to Vienna, it is presenting what government is planning to do or what government is doing for UNODC or the UN to support. So we are always available as a member state to support Ghana to fight corruption.
The general public should demonstrate a strong will to fight corruption. I think, as I said, it's not one party. All should come together to fight corruption. Public sector, private sector, civil society, individuals on the street. We have to demonstrate a strong will to fight corruption.